The great circus floated down from the heavens. It appeared to be birthed from the bulbous patches of the burned orange sunset clouds. The tent's plum purple and red canvas trims fluttered gently as if angelic wings. Being a showman was always my utmost desire, and that dream increased tenfold with the vision of the flying tent. The denizens of my farming town of Potatoville stared stunned with necks craned. The great tent, the magnificent tent, landed in the center square beside the water fountain, spreading a kit of cooing spotty-tailed pigeons. A 16-year-old boy who had mastered the fine art of juggling is apt to be curious over a flying circus. "Pops, we gotta go see it," I informed my father, squeezing his arm. "Maybe afterward show him my stuff." "It's not the place to be parading your juggling, Rick," my dad said, wagging a finger at the tent. "Any flying circus is shifty." But it was exactly the place to perform. I stood, peering forward with the encroaching curios multitude of Potatoville. A blank blackboard suddenly snuck out the canvas opening and stuck itself to the tent a few yards from the opening. An amazing, remarkable trick. It held my attention until a mysterious wind swept through the square, swirling past the enclosure of double-story gray stone buildings until finally stirring the canvas's opening. The strip of tent flickered as if teasing. The crowd sucked in a collective gasp. Red Boots appeared at the edge of the tent's opening flap, then out stepped a clown. He was no ordinary run-of-the-mill circus clown. He had the strawberry red shoes for sure, along with a white-painted face and blood-red hair that hung in unfastened folds beneath his plum-purple hat, a felt hat with a narrow brim and indented crown. But that's where the similarities ended. For starters, his hat was severely creased, as if it had once been sat upon by a circus elephant. He wore black pants with holes worn through the knees that were patched in brown cloth, but the brown cloth now had fraying thread, and his white and black hoop t-shirt appeared to be either stained in patches of coffee or brown sweat. Please, oh please let it be coffee. Outperforming his clothes was his face. It had no broad smile of a joyful clown, but rather a frown of a prison warden who'd been working the same jail for 30 years and was hanging for retirement. His face held as many wrinkles as his crumpled hat, but he only appeared 40, maybe 46. An unlit cigarette hung loosely from his mouth like a wobbly car muffler. Pops eyed him suspiciously. A nomadic weirdo. I agreed, but was determined to be optimistic. Distinguished gentleman. The clown coughed like he had emphysema, then forced a miserable smile and motioned an arm toward the tent's opening. "See the resplendent circus," he hollered, voice encasing as many cracks as our old town's pavement. The multitude murmured amongst themselves, an averse overtone. "No one's supporting him, Dad," I said. Pops rubbed my messy brown hair into an even bigger mess. Perhaps for good reason. The clown huffed at the reluctant bystanders and punched his fists into his hips. He swiveled his lips as if brooding upon his next enticement, then strutted 3 steps to the blackboard. Taking a fat chunk of white chalk, he scrawled noisily in messy writing, "Hot dogs 20% off." Then he rotated toward the crowd and called, "Cut rate grub with each ticket." The troop of Potatoville's denizens chattered louder, perhaps enticed over the offer. "What a rip," Dad said. "At what price would you sell a hot dog?" I asked him. My unfun Pop shrugged. "Depends how desperate I was for a sale." But the crowd didn't seem desperate for hot dogs, nor to purchase tickets. There were incremental toe creepings forward from a few brave stragglers, but little more. Something needed to be done. A showman needs an audience. I stepped toward the tent, appearing interested, trying to goad the crowd. A chubby boy wearing a sloppy shirt and shorts eyed me intriguingly. Dad took my arm. "We gotta go, Rick. Your mother is sweating over her herbed lamb roast. She won't appreciate us being late." "It's wrong to leave a poor man struggling," I said. "And you've always tutored me to do the right thing." Pops rubbed my shoulder. "Sometimes the right thing is too difficult. Perhaps sometimes we need to be stronger." "Every man has his limitations," Dad said. I stood defiant. "Not Superman." Dad furrowed his brows. "It's wrong for you to abandon your mother's dinner." My father was right, sort of. But perchance this clown's predicament was greater than Mom's. After all, Mom would be okay. Dad's shoe store made us plenty of cash. But this clown, he's just trying to make money to feed his family some succulent lamb, I cleverly argued. Maybe he could feed them hot dogs, Dad said callously. The temptation of the great tent's curiosities lured me, and realizing my dirty pockets possessed a little change, I told my father, "I'll reheat my dinner in the oven." Then, feeling guilty over abandoning Mom's cooking, I added, "Then scrub all the dirty dishes." I pulled away from his arm and swept forward, hoping to incite the crowd, calling back to my father, "Tell Mom I'm doing the right thing." It's possible my father gave chase, but once I started toward the clown, the circus, and all its oddities, the mob flew into an excited frenzy and flocked toward the splendid colors of the purple and red tent. It quickly sprouted into a tight squeeze, way too snug for my pops with his overindulgent lamb roast belly to nudge through, and in no time I found myself at the entrance of the awe-inspiring tent. A bulbous chap barged before me with his wife and son, the chubby youth in the sloppy clothes. The father had a bushy mustache, and his stubby legs supported a wide girth the width of a front door. He accosted the clown. "What kind of show is this?" The clown eyed him grumpily. "A glorious show that will leave you flushed." Then he pointed toward the tent opening. "Now get that stomach of yours in there. You probably just making an appearance for my cheap hot dogs anyway." The clown chuckled to himself, and the hippopotamus-figured man shook his head, perhaps confused or bemused, then strolled into the opening flap with his family, fading into the mysterious gloom. The crowd kept rudely barging past me, and it made me want to shove them aside, seeing it was my initial idea to discover the circus's wonders. But I stayed polite, and let the majority go first so they could have the prime choice of seats. The clown was taking cash and waving good folk though, not even handing out tickets. The clown waylaid me with his storm-gray eyes. $10, he said. Eagerly, I dug into my corduroys and fished out my coins. But after counting my change, it only amounted to $7.25. I looked at him, squeezing my eyebrows in my most pathetic pout. "Please, can I have a discount?" The clown grunted and coughed, and his unlit cigarette twitched. No way he'd let me enter. Not a man this grumpy. Discount only on hot dogs. My dream lied inside that canvas, little more than the length of an alligator's tail away. Maybe if he knew my skills. I gathered up 3 wayward stones. "Let me perform," I said, then tossed the pebbles toward the reddish evening sky, looping and looping, until I fumbled one and it fell on the clown's red shoe. I shrugged. "A strong wind." The clown rolled his eyes. "Scram." A true showman would never relinquish a dream. Perhaps if I showered him with praise. "Nice hat. Can I try it on?" Hot dogs. A single light bulb hung at the apex of the tent, and permeated a golden hue around the purple and red striped canvas. Above the light was a circular black expanse the size of a beach umbrella that appeared to trail into nothingness, a brilliant illusion. The central arena was 4 times the size of our 3-bedroom home, and possessed a dusty surface. Wooden benches, bowed and twisted, were stacked in ascending steps, circling the entire tent, save the small entryway and another black expanse toward the back. The rear expanse was as wide as a double doorway, and also seemed to dissolve into black space. How cool would it be to wander inside? I was nudged from the encroaching crowd and forced to maneuver to my left and find a seat. A spare spot resided on the front bench, beside the chubby boy with his mother and father. The lad was already scoffing one hot dog, and had another perched on his lap. It bothered me to squish in beside him, but the crowd was firming and it was a front seat and I really wanted to see what was going to unfold in the curious tent, and besides, the front was the best position for volunteers to parade their skills. So I sat beside the boy's portly backside. Almost instantly, a green-eyed squat woman, painted entirely blue, stood right before the stocky boy. Her orange hair glimmered under the light, and it was long and electric and wild. But she was no acrobat, as her stomach was bulging through her purple-buttoned shirt, threatening to pop the top wide open for an awkward viewing of her ample bosom. "Hot dogs $3, she said to me, and trailing behind her was a steel cart. How many you after, sonny? My stomach was not even growling nor asking for anything, and I really was looking forward to Mom's lamb roast after this show. But I had promised the clown, and if he learned I rescinded on my word, performing for him would be out of the question. I dug into my pocket and extracted all my shiny change. "One, please." She raked her copious, carroty hair from her green eyes, leaned forward for a closer look at my hand. "Sufficient coins for 2 hot dogs." "One will be adequate," I said. She eyed me as if I just criticized her weight. The stout boy zapped his hand across and snatched all my coins, save the quarter that fell into the dust. Then he slapped the money into the woman's blue hand. "I'll have another." His father cast him a delighted gaze, the father's moon face no doubt inspiring the boy's appetite. The mother contemplated him, her eyes beneath her elegant hat and brown fringe glowing with motherly pride. "Good boy, Jeffrey," she said. Gee, I thought, there was nothing good about that. But I didn't want to protest and cause a scene and be booted from the arena, and it was probably honorable to show mercy to my chubby buddy, so I let it slide, and before I could scratch my own backside, the woman had spun around, as if she were an acrobat, dug into her tray and produced 2 hot dogs. The bread was thick and soft, and the sausage reddish-brown and fat as a pogo stick, and it was adorned in luscious layers of radish and onion dripping with red sauce and mustard. It smelled almost as good as a lamb roast. And so, building hunger in anticipating the show and all, and seeing I just paid for 2 of them, I bit into my hot dog. It was rich and delicious, and tasted like a circus party in my mouth. Hefty Jeffrey no doubt agreed, finishing the one in his hand, replacing the one on his lap into his mouth, and then setting the one I paid for on his lap. He shuffled, and the dog began a slow tumble from his leg. Should I save it? Of course. I lashed out a hand and caught his hot dog before it splatted on the ground. I placed it back in the sure confines between his 2 largish knees. "Don't drop your dog," I said. In all the excitement, my bowels began a niggling rumble, and it made me think, scram to the can right now to ensure you won't miss a second of the sure-to-be spectacular show. My eyes roved the tent for a toilet. Out toward the left, at the very back of the seats, about a quarter of a way around from me, I spotted it. There was only one toilet. A single black section of canvas hosting a white placard with a clever pun written in red, "Lady A's an ND Gentlemen." I was about to get up and go and drop a deuce, but a man with a blue shirt hanging loosely from his pants, and a woman in a green sweater just skipped inside the toilet room, so I thought, nah, I can hold it. The blackboard flew in and perched itself down by the canvas entry, then the clown zeeped close tent. The grumpy clown strutted in with his red boots a-flashin' and black and white hooped shirt with its coffee stains whipping a trail in his wind. A microphone began lowering from the black expanse, suspended by a lead. Even that felt spectacular. The clown took the mic in the middle of the dusty arena, then spun on his heels, one hand outstretched embracing the audience. I crept to the edge of my seat, well-buckled wooden bench. I'll be performing like him one day. The clown cleared his throat, unlit cigarette wobbling precariously between his lips. "Ladies and," his voice started off loud and exuberant, but quickly died into hackneyed doldrums. "Gentlemen," he said, suddenly his body dropping. Then he spoke like an actor not interested in his lines. "Welcome to the resplendent circus. Dreams will dazzle before your eyes. You will never again hold such splendor." He cocked a crooked smile, gazed around. A once-only viewing. And after touching the brim of his purple hat, he faced the rear black expanse and held out both hands in a welcoming embrace. The clown may have lost a touch interest, but the crowd huddled forward anxiously. What's going to appear? This is too much, too freaking much. Disappearing act. From the black expanse emerged a purple-knuckled hand. "I dare say this is the show," Chubby Jeffrey said while munching into his hot dog. The rest of us kept watching as more movement crept from the dark. Slowly a purple arm was revealed, then a torso of a flabby stomach that was covered in a freely blowing black sleeveless shirt, and finally the creature's entire weird body emerged, save his head which still hid in the shadows. All of him, an appalling sight. His arms and legs were contorted in implausible angles, like his knees and elbows worked backward or possibly even sideways. His neck was elongated but far from elegant, as it was lumpy and bumpy as the surface of a bowl of dried, crusty porridge. When the monster's face appeared, it revealed the creature to be male and a whopping 8 feet tall. The stunned crowd stole a communal gasp, and Jeffrey dropped the meat from his buns, which he quickly recovered from off his shorts. The right side of the creature's head was a purple slop of loose skin that ran in pleats and hung in flappy strips like a mudslide. The other half of his face had normal enough skin, other than it being purple, and it was clear enough to recognize his nose with its nostril and his left blue eye gazing curiously at us all. The right eye was half concealed by flappy skin. Funny enough, the first thing I thought was it must be annoying having your vision half shrouded by purplish skin. But then the whole weirdness of it returned and overtook me. His dark purple lips couldn't conceal all his protruding sharp teeth, and it made me think he could easily eat one of Mom's lamb roasts. He wore black pants that appeared to be shiny leather, but he wore no shoes. He'd never need them, with the soles of his thickly calloused feet appearing to be more impenetrable than concrete, not to mention the yellowing sharp toenails would pierce the hardiest of leather. "He's really grotesque," Jeffrey said, as if assessing the creature like a snobbish but impressed critic. "Keep your eyes on him, he's bound to do something freakish." The clown remained standing in the center of the arena, his hands stretched toward the purple monster. Mr. Purple slowly ambled toward the clown with all the grace of an octopus walking on dry land. Soon he stood beside the cantankerous clown. The clown remained clutching the microphone and boomed into it, "Meet Plum." Then he tossed the microphone and it zipped skywards. The clown turned abrupt left like a drilled soldier and marched toward the seats. The crowd sat stunned in silence. Purple Plum persisted, standing in the middle of the arena with his shoulders slumped, twiddling his fingers like a naughty child who was sent to the corner. It was pure intense awkwardness, the air so thick that if the clown threw his unlit cigarette out into the arena, it would have likely just hung in the air. I'd felt this purple creature's pressure before, juggling coffee cups outside of local cafes where the snobbish gourmands turn their noses. It felt wrong to let Plum stand there in shame, so despite feeling envious of him taking the spotlight, my deserved limelight, I did the only true thing, the right thing. I stretched out my arms real wide, then drew my hands together for a sharp clap. The monster raised his head and peered over at me. There seemed to develop a gleam in his sky-blue eyes, an understanding between a young man and a deplorable beast. "Don't be afraid, Plum," I whispered. "Regale the mob." I clapped again with a little more force, and hefty Jeffrey joined in, and slowly our clapping became a contagious flu and spread its way through the crowd. Hands came together from all walks of life. The monster's weird face and giant set of jaws that could rival a saber-toothed tiger developed a disturbed smile. Across the arena, resting upon the front row of seats, the clown rolled his eyes and yawned. "I should go over there and kick your ass." But there was no time for beatings, as soon monstrous Plum took courage and started wiggling his backside. Out from the dark center of the ceiling, a black circled cloak dropped, as if a miniature dressing room. It fell over the monster and completely covered him from unsightly head to hideous toe. A moment later, the cloak withdrew to the ceiling, and the monster stood holding a clucking white chicken hooked beneath one arm and a pink piglet clamped in his other hand. He stretched his head back and slowly opened his mouth wide, revealing steak-knife teeth. "He couldn't be." "Spectacular," Chunky Jeffrey said. "He's gonna gobble them." But the monster didn't crunch down on any unsuspecting heads. Instead, he set the pink piglet down, and it scurried away, little legs kicking a dust. Then the monster held the chicken out while twirling slowly, giving all the audience a clear showing. Then Plum called, "Chase," and threw the chicken toward the pig. Its wings flapped heavily, but it didn't keep him in flight, and he came crashing to the dusty circle of the arena. The chicken bolted, and the piglet scooted after it, its little legs scissoring at a speed almost as ridiculous as this show. The pig chased the chicken around the arena, while the purple monster stood in the middle of it all. "Best day ever," Jeffrey exclaimed. The clown rose from his seat and huffed as if he'd run a marathon. He strode to the arena's center, kicking the scurrying piglet as it passed. He caught the lowering mic as it dropped for him and called out, "3 volunteers needed." "Oh, great heavens, be watchin', this is my chance." I leaped from my seat as if my legs were uncoiling springs, waving hands near high as the magnificent tent. Me. Me. Pick the world's best juggler. The grumpy clown cast me a sullen gaze. My mind blabbered, he's gonna pick me. I'm gonna be one of the volunteers. But he shook his head no, and picked out 3 large women from the front row. They stood together in their bulging suave dresses, giggling like schoolgirls with a crush on the teacher. That blows, I said, and slumped onto my seat. Jeffrey eyed me with a patronizing nose. You've got no class for circus performing, anyhow. I wanted to slap his greasy lips right off his fat, bulbous cheeks. But of course, that would be the wrong thing to do, and a great showman never retaliated. And maybe there would be one more chance to join the weird show. The grumpy clown took the sizable women and led them into the black expanse at the rear of the canvas. They disappeared one by one. Oh, fiddlesticks. I really wanted to explore that black expanse. Good old Clown Grumpy returned to his seat, and all fell quiet as the crowd seemed to wait for what would become of the 3 women. Purple Plum seemed uncomfortable and danced some sort of weird jig for 5 minutes. Then settling himself, he faced the black expanse and hollered in a gruff smoker's voice, "Return ye maidens." Then out from the black expanse waddled what appeared to be the 3 women who amazingly now appeared like frogs, their faces a pure frog's head, green and hairless with wide mouths and yellow calloused chins, and their fancy dresses bedecking their bodies. So glad they still wore their dresses. Jeffrey's eyes bulged with wonder. How did they costume them so fast? Each frog woman carried an instrument. One a reddish violin, another a 4-string spruce-top ukulele, and the third a bright orange banjo. They huddled to the side and lurched into playing weird carnival music. Incredible women! Jeffrey cried, then nudged me with a not-so-chubby elbow. You could never play like that. I leaned my hand to my chin, my elbow to my lap. A setup. Then, one after another, various animals emerged from the black expanse and seized the sooty-floored arena, each with an imbecilic act. Plum took a shimmering pink conductor's baton from the Frog Women Orchestra and waved it madly, and somehow seemed to be guiding the animals. A goat was walking upright on 2 back legs, pink shoes on all its hooves. A set of swings fell from the top expanse, and a chimpanzee with blazing orange fur dashed from the black expanse, then flew around the swings, performing gravity-defying flips and swings on a totally shambolic routine. A robust ram with curly horns that swung all around his face kept busting through boards as they dropped from the black expanse. Through all this, my bowels began to increase their rumble, probably from the hot dog, and so must have Chubby Jeffries, because just as I stood, he barged up beside me and hollered, "It's gonna blow to miss this, but I gotta go." "Okay, Jeffrey," his mother said, tilting her elegant hat. "Don't make a scene." Well, I'm not battling him for the toilet. I planted my backside right back onto the wooden bench. I felt an itch in my right cheek and hoped it wasn't a splinter. The show was enhanced by a proud, golden-furred lion cub who strode around roaring as loud as a male adult. He attracted a mishmash of adoring smiles and horrid looks. When Jeffrey had not returned to his seat and my bowels began to grumble like the lion cub, again I looked across the flight of stairs to the toilet. Hurry up! A woman in a fancy fox fur coat, which had the poor animal's former tail wrapped around the collar, entered the black canvas of the toilet, and she was quickly followed by a man in a gray coat. This is ridiculous. The damned loo keeps filling up. I happened to glance down at the crowd and noticed a few spare seats scattered about. Well, not seats exactly, but spare spots of raw timber where the benches ran. Where are those people? Wriggled on my seat and peered at the show. The monster was reaching his long arms into the black expanse, and with bulging biceps he began pulling something from the murk. It merged into a boulder the size of a fat cow. He kept dragging the big old hunk of brown rock until it resided in the middle of the stage, and for a weird moment he ran his hands over it as if massaging it or something, as if trying to create some melodramatic tension. Then he raised his purple fist and hammered down on the stone with an ear-piercing crack. A fissure started splitting down the great rock, until it spidered all over like it was an egg with something hatching. The rock kept splitting. Then something did start hatching. All the tension actually made me crave the toilet more, and I indistinctly dropped a glance its way, and noticed Jeffrey's father was gone from his seat, and there were more seats vacant, and then 2 teenage boys entered the toilet. Is the toilet hosting a whopping party? A disturbed squeal came from the crowd, and I flashed my gaze to the arena. Out from the rock emerged by what all accounts appeared to be a small dromaeosaurid dinosaur, possibly a velociraptor, seeing it had a large slashing claw on each hind foot. People retracted in their seats, but the little leathery-skinned creature didn't maul nobody. Instead, he began trotting around on his hind legs, sporting a deranged grin. He was friendly. Again, with the aggravation of tension, the toilet called, hollered, shouted in my ears, "You need to plant your ass on my porcelain seat and let rip," and I looked back toward the loo. The clown saw me, and he frowned terribly. He stood off his seat and started marching my way, eyes with a glare deadlier than any raptor. I really needed to visit the toilet now, for various reasons. Given his aggression toward me, he'd never hire me to be a performer, so I decided to quit this shenanigan and egress from the tent. I got up and walked quickly but calmly to the exit flap, and after a nervous search for the zipper, I leaned down and grabbed it and went to pull it up. The little handle snapped off. My heart hammered, and I prepared to scream, "The clowns entrapped us all." I spun around to unleash the full throttle of my voice box, and there the clown stood before my eyeballs. His stormy eyes glared into my hazels. His eyebrows furrowed so low they nearly crossed onto his nose. There was no stopping what was about to ensue. We were gonna have a fist fight. At least it would make for some form of show. I raised my fists. "Take your fiercest swing." He didn't raise a hand of clutched knuckles, but instead stuck his hand deep into his large pants pocket. Oh hell! He's going for a pistol. "Gun!" I yelled. The crowd, now with at least 24 missing in the loo, turned to look upon me. The clown withdrew his hand from his dirty pocket, but didn't pull out a firearm, but instead held a glimmering golden key. He stuck the key into the small hole in the side of the zipper, and the door flap amazingly peeled back by itself to reveal the early night sky and the charming glow of the window-lit buildings of the surrounding square of Potatoeville. The clown took a huge breath and, mustering all his energy, hollered to the crowd, "Ladies and ND gents, the show is over." Clearly fed up, he mumbled, "Please leave and thank you for your rapt attention of the resplendent circus." It's over. But I never got to perform. All the animals waded back into the black expanse, the women costumed as frogs too. Purple Plum sat at the edge of the expanse, breathing heavily and resting from all his wild arm-waving conducting. The clown left me and headed off into the arena. Everyone clapped and whistled, all the children thrilled with enthusiasm. Never in the likes would they see any of this again, whatever it was. And one by one people started exiting the great purple stripped canvas. Parents bumped past me, chatting and mumbling amongst themselves over the peculiarities of the show. With my hopes of joining the circus dashed, another wave of pressure strained my bowels. I'm gonna have to run back to that toilet, or go right here in my pants. I glanced at the toilet and saw the grumpy clown enter it. This is it. My final opportunity. I'm striding into that toilet, and first thing I'm gonna do is, well, go to the toilet. Then I'm confronting that clown and telling him squarely, "You're hiring me for one show, and you'll see I'll dazzle all." So I headed for the toilet in the magnificent tent. I slipped through the black toilet canvas, and to my surprise, there were no desperate people caught in a legs-crossed lineup. The toilet was bare-ass empty. They must have slipped away without me noticing. It was a drab room, completely surrounded by red canvas, and had 3 little zip rooms lined up on the right, obviously the toilets. The farthest little room had its zipper open, but the flap was closed and it kept its privacy. Then grunts came from the far-sided tent, deep groans sounding like a man trying to extract something the size of that boulder the monster had, and it desperately made me wonder what was in those hot dogs. It also made me a little petrified to go, but the rumbling in my stomach told me flatly, "You are not bailing." As I approached the tented rooms, I realized the vile grunting was not someone struggling to fill the toilet bowl at all, but rather it was 2 people broiled in anger. The noises suddenly grew louder. "Arranged by and Gray and get that foot off me." It was a clear fight. One of my father's last words to me regarding helping others was, "Every man has his limitations," but despite the rotten situation, I couldn't just run away because it suited me. I had to help. I stepped forward and whipped open the red flap of canvas. The loo. Before me paraded the world's most unforgettable scene. It was even more bizarre and outlandish than the show. In the narrow toilet booth, the clown stood facing a white porcelain toilet bowl, lid open. The bowl was fine, nice and neat, and the lid had no problems either. The clown, however, had one red shoe planted on the ground, a place where you would expect it to be, but the other shoe was angled up near the bowl and not upon the rim. The clown's red shoe sat upon Jeffrey's father's head. His damned round face and bushy mustache were poking up out of the bowl, his eyes and mouth all squeezed together with excruciating pain, as if he was struggling to go. But he wasn't, though. He was struggling to stay up. The toilet was sucking him down as he struggled to keep abreast, while the grumpy clown kept ramming his red shoe into the man's hair, trying to finish off the plunge. A smelly surge of brown water sloshed out from the bowl and splashed upon the clown's pants and t-shirt, so the stains upon his shirt were not from coffee. "Release him from the loo," I called. Until now, the clown had been so preoccupied in his battle that he hadn't heard me, but at the sound of my voice he spun around, glaring with storm-dark eyes and crooked teeth, as if he were a sprung murderer caught in the act. Jeffrey's father gasped hard. "Save me from the latrine," he called, but the clown refocused and stomped hard, thumping his heel into the man's forehead. The clown punched the button atop the toilet so hard he wobbled the lid. Jeffrey's father's eyes shot near wide as the bowl, as if he felt something. He knew. All three of us seemed to understand one simple but terrible truth. It was too late to stop the toilet. The man's head started spinning around and around, in a tight spiraling gyration, as if he were connected to a merry-go-round. This was the last of the flushing. I watched mesmerized as he slowly sunk, twirling faster until his head spun so fast it was hard to determine the back of his head from his eyes. When it became too blurry to decipher, there issued from the bowl a sonically loud gurgle, as if it was slurping down a giant pungent load of manure from a bull elephant. "Jeffrey," the man cried out to his boy. At the edge of the bowl, the man fell, his muted howls muffled by a distant wash of flushed goop. A silence fell. The only accompaniment was the clown's heavy breathing. I took a step back, more stunned than if a million bees pricked me. The clown drew his red shoe from the harrowed depths of the bowl, shook off the splashes of water, then stamped it on the ground. He stood square-shouldered in the tight compartments of the toilet booth, the red canvas bordering him. He adjusted the brim of his purple trilby, screwing his face into a vigilante snarl. "I've gotta go," I said. What else could I say? With great showmanship, the clown waved his arm toward the loo. By all means. He either totally misunderstood me, or was issuing a deadly threat. "I mean, not go to the toilet," I said, voice shaky. "I have to go home." The clown shook his head in a slow, deadly manner, until his head picked up pace as if he were trying to shake it off his shoulders. He snapped still and said, "You've seen too much." He sprang from his position and leaped upon me, moving as fast as a cheetah. He grabbed my shoulders with such great strength, it appeared he could crush my bones into powder. "You're not feeding me to the toilet," I screamed and battered his arms. But he paid no heed, and dragged me back into depths of the booth, and shoved me toward the toilet bowl with an added kick to my pants. I fell forward and stooped over the dreaded bowl. It contained brownish water that bubbled slightly and drifted in a subtle clockwise swirl. It smelt like a miscellany of blood and mud. And like the black expanses in the tent, you could see no bottom. Before I could stand, the clown clamped his claws to the back of my neck and shoved my face toward the foul-smelling liquid. This was going to be worse than any head flushing I'd received from school bullies, and I'd experienced too. "You can dive head first," the clown said, voice gruff like gravel rested in his lungs. "It doesn't matter to the loo." He shoved my head down with a violent thrust, and my hair tipped the water. I grabbed the slippery wet rim and held on with my arms shaking, trying to keep myself from the giant flush. I kicked my heels into the clown, but it didn't seem to do any more damage than perhaps cause a few later bruises to his shins. the purple contusions would match his monster. "Let it be," he said. "Once the toilet starts sucking you, there is no stopping it." He jostled my head farther down, the water licking the edge of my scalp. The liquid was warm but far from inviting. It felt like it was tasting me. The clown was too strong and I couldn't beat him off. He would no doubt seal my fate with the flush. Then one of his hands slipped off my neck, and I sensed he was reaching for the flush button. All seemed lost until I remembered what happened during the flushing of Jeffrey's dad. The lid moved when the clown punched the button. "The lid's loose." I quit pushing against the bowl and, in a last-ditch effort, took a giant breath and reached up toward the toilet lid. With my hands gone from the rim, the clown managed to shove my head deep into the warm liquid. For a moment, my whole world turned a deep solid brown. My smelly farewell. But then I snatched the lid off the toilet. I swung it around as if it was an axe, and I was trying to fall a mighty oak in a single swing. The lid caught the clown unawares and struck him with a skull-cracking thwank. I flung upward, wet hair spraying the canvas. The clown fell back in a clattering heap, as if he were a pile of poo dropped from a rhinoceros's rump. I straightened myself, raked back my wet hair, and stood over him. Blood sleeked down the side of his head and temple like tiny slithering snakes. He was barely breathing enough to raise the cotton of his black and white hooped shirt. His purple hat sat crooked on his head, and he gazed up at me defeated, and yet a strange relief swirled in his eyes, as if a tired beggar finally glad to be dying and being set free of his wretched, lonely life. The trilby fell down upon his lap. With the clown's strength failing, he grabbed it with a feeble hand. Finally catching my breath, I asked, "You flush folk for a living?" He shook his head, as if innocent. "It's not me. It's the monster and the animals." "Plum?" Mustering his last drop of life energy, he flipped the purple trilby up toward me. I went to duck from the filthy wrinkled thing, but it came down and landed flat on my head and seemed to tug tight around my ears, as if invisible hands pulled it down. It horrified me, because it belonged to the clown. I grabbed its brim to yank it off quick smart, but when I pulled it, it felt like it tugged all the roots of every strand of my hair. I tried again, but the hat seemed like a permanent hairpiece. Traces of red began seeping through the clown's eyes, and they started whirling like a slow-draining toilet, evidently his life fading fast. As he leaned against the toilet canvas, he started to chuckle, a terrifying sound in a lonely toilet booth. "You'd have to rip your scalp off to remove that trilby," he said. "No problem," I said and tugged some more but found the pain unbearable, like every nerve ending was screaming. "It won't matter if you do," the clown said. "The trilby would fly back on and stick to your bloodied scalp. Once it's on, it's on." I stepped away from him, shocked, disbelieving. "What is this?" "The hat and plum are interlinked," the clown said. "You gotta travel around from village to village and ensure the crowd gets fed well, so some will go to the toilet and get flushed." It seemed ridiculous to ask, but I felt impelled. "What happens after a flushing?" The clown gasped for air, struggling to find a breath. "The water boils them in the great pot beneath." "What refuse?" "There's nothing beneath the tent." "It's there, kid." "Well then what?" "Then the purple monster and his animals feed." My face screwed in endless contortions. "Eat boiled spectators." The clown smirked. "Not the frogs, though. They gulp 'em alive. You gotta fetch 'em 3 plump ladies so they can wear their dresses and pretend like it's them in disguise." "Horrific," I said. "Why doesn't Plum just eat them raw?" The clown eyed me as if I were terrible. "Do you like raw food?" I shook my head. "Eating people boiled or otherwise, disgusting." The clown shrugged. "It is what it is. But if you don't feed the monster and his friends with at least 24 toilet goers, the monster could very well flush and eat you. He'd have no one to open the tent, though. The purple trilby would find someone. Besides, if you refuse, the hat will fry your brains so bad you will start to cook from your insides. If you refuse that warning, it will sizzle you dead, then simply choose another host." Being a showman had been one of my greatest desires, but that dream dwindled 20-fold the moment the purple hat made its home upon my scalp. How do I get rid of the trilby? The dying man smiled with crooked teeth and a haggard face. Die like me. It ain't so. And then his voice trailed off and he slumped to the floor, arms splayed out in front of him and his head resting upon his bicep. I stumbled out of the room as if I drank a dozen drams of the world's strongest whiskey, and when I entered the main arena of the tent, it felt like I was floating upon a cloud. It felt like the whole structure was floating upon a mass of clouds. The great tent was empty, all except Purple Plum, who sat on the arena's floor by the black expanse, resting back on his twisted purple hands. He cast an eerie smile at me, as if we were long-lost buddies. "You're not my buddy, pal." Determined not to accept this fate, I stumbled toward the exit canvas. I turned the golden key, but it wouldn't unlock a thing. The tent had me imprisoned. "The tent won't let you open it until it lands," the purple monster said, smiling. "Land?" Plum laughed, a belly-bouncing bellow. It occurred to me the cloudy sensation had meant that we were flying. And so I just sat completely exhausted at the opposite end of the tent, away from the monster. I considered fighting him for barely a second, but realized he was the size of a baby elephant and would pummel me with his fists, and then flush me and boil me and then eat me. So I just sat in a mindless stupor for what felt like an hour but could have been 2 or 3, until suddenly a great, woofing sound emanated from around the tent and it bumped to a halt. The circus had landed. I turned the gold key and opened the canvas to reveal a glorious blue day. The blackboard at the entrance slid outside. We were in another vibrant square of another town, one I had never visited, but its quaint stone buildings suggested it wasn't more than a few days' journey from Potatoeville. I stood in a daze with the purple trilby shielding me from the sun, gazing at the gathered, curious crowd, who watched me with abandoned wonder. I glanced back at Monstrous Plum, who stood ready to enter the rear black expanse, but before he disappeared into the shadow, he smiled and said, "Make sure you flush me some good tucker, or you'll be my lunch." And then he licked his teeth with his lumpy plum-purple tongue and then strode into the dark expanse. I swallowed. Dad said when it came to good deeds, every man has his limitations. Had I met mine? I stepped outside to the huge blackboard that hung upon the tent. The board still read hot dogs 20% off, and I rubbed it out with my hand, spitting on the board to clean it quicker. When it was as black-green as a muddy canal, I asked myself the question I had asked my father earlier: at what price would you sell a hot dog? With the crowd watching but not stepping forward, I grabbed the white chunk of chalk and scrawled in my neatest handwriting, "Hot dogs half price."